Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Everyone can hear? Great. 25 years ago, Susan Seitel founded Work and Family Connection out of a desire to help employers become more family-friendly and supportive. And in 1991, she identified a need for information about the changing nature of work and family. Assisted by her sister, Joan, she began to write the Work-Life Newsbrief. It started as press cuttings and her own readings and grew to include extracts and academic reports, surveys, and research. Her Work-Life Newsbrief was avidly read by an eclectic readership, hungry for guidance and community. The Work-Life Newsbrief included a summary of articles on companies' best practices, relevant legislation, global news, and innovative services. And Susan has written 216 issues of the Trend Report, but who's counting? Susan also published Steps to Designing a Successful Work-Life Program, which evolved from her consulting work. And she translated her knowledge of best practices into a series of white papers, helping organizations focus on how to improve productivity, positively impact satisfaction, increase employee engagement, and more. In 2006, Susan launched her new website and began publishing a newsbrief and trend report. She has been a trailblazer, and she's shared her immense knowledge, passion for learning, and insights with all of us. She's brought visibility to our important work and promoted the value proposition for flexibility and work life. Yet with all of her accomplishments, what Susan is most proud of is her family. And her children and grandchildren have come here from all over the country to celebrate with her. So on behalf of the conference board, it is my great honor to congratulate the recipient of the Work-Life Leadership Council Media Award, Susan Seitel.
Last month was a very unusual month for me from traumatic. My husband had major back surgery, to the tragic. We lost a much loved young daughter-in-law to brain cancer, to the merely irritating. I crashed my PC and my laptop and lost my wallet. And I was beginning to feel a little Job-like when I got that wonderful email from Ellen telling me that I was about to join the company of people like Sue Schellenberger and Judy Woodruff and Keith Hammonds and Carol Evans. I remember actually the day that Sue Schellenberger won this award. I think, was it the first one?
First was the first one.
Oh, okay. I was in the audience. I was sitting next to Roger Neugebauer, who many of you know, a veteran work-life person. And he turned to me and he said, "You'll get this someday." And I said, "Oh, no, this is for real journalists." It was actually 20 years ago, Wendy, this month, that I was at this big company in St. Paul, and I was trying to sell their HR person the idea of doing a survey of his population. And suddenly he stopped and he turned around and he pointed to his credenza, which was piled high with, it was a mess. It was just full of papers. And in those days, you know, everything came by mail. And so all this mail was piled on this credenza. And he said, "You know what you could do for me?" He said, "You could read my mail." I said, "That would be such a gift. And you could tell me what's important and what isn't." And, you know, I think he was kidding, but I just thought, oh, what a great idea. I could do that. So, beginning in April of 1990 with my sister's help, and every day of every month for the next 20 years, with one exception, we gathered the day's for what was most important and what would make the most difference in the world, and summarized the articles. The only exception was the day the airplane crashed into the World Trade Center. I couldn't do it. So we just extended everybody's subscription for a month. So otherwise, we just published each month until this last January when I decided to quit. It was a total of 235 issues, recording a kind of history of work life in the world. And actually, in those early days, there was only one work-life issue, as you all know, and that was childcare, because people were in shock. All these women going back, mothers going back to work, and what could they do about it? We've saved every article we've ever written, and we have both hard copies and electronic versions. And last week, I searched our archives using the word daycare, and I came up with 223 hits. I think in those early days, at least 100 big companies opened daycare centers, and every time somebody did, we wrote about it. Some forward thinkers were also starting to think about emergency daycare as we were getting started. Some of you might remember the consortium that started in New York. I love Ellen sitting here, she's nodding. The consortium was HBO and Colgate and Con Edison and Ernst & Young and Time Magazine. So that was 21 years ago. And then IBM, which was always a leader, started their Fund for Dependent Care initiatives that year. And then Hallmark, the following year, piloted sick child care. Whatever happened to sick child care? Kind of disappeared. And they even began to talk about flexible hours, which was very rare in those days. And it wasn't really until the late 90s that we started to see articles about telecommuting and virtual work and alternative work arrangements. We first heard the word engagement in 1993, I found when I went back and looked. But it took about 10 years before we started to catch on to how important that really was. And it wasn't until the mid-90s that we mentioned the word father and started to talk about men. And as you all know, work life has really followed the economy. And in boom times, the news is all about recruiting and retaining skilled workers and how are we going to keep them. And in recessions like now, it's more like, how are we going to hold down the damage that we've done by downsizing and layoffs, and how are we going to keep the survivors motivated, and how to cut the cost of benefits. So it's definitely economically driven. I think now that we're beginning to move in the right direction, companies are beginning to catch on to what works with Wi-Fi and Skype and webinars and webcams. Technology is really helping us do what we need to do, and that is focus on how to get results and allow workers to have a life. I think looking ahead, if I could have my wish, I'd add a dimension to the conversation that seems to me to have been missing, and maybe it's because we think companies are so short-sighted, which probably they are, for the next quarter, but that is a focus on why it is incumbent on companies to make sure that, to do everything in their power, to see that employees are not only have healthy families, but are prosperous, because that's the payoff for employers in the long run. Who's going to buy the products, and who's going to be good workers. So I thank you, Work-Life Leadership Council. This is just an amazing experience. I am most grateful to have been lucky enough to be in on the start of this wonderful field, to look back 20 years and still be able to look ahead. And most of all, to have this acknowledgement before I'm dead. Nancy, Michael, Stephen, granddaughter Lee. in the Obama administration, and Chris, Lee's boyfriend. I'd also like to introduce my right arm, who is Ann Nolan. Thank you.